check test one, check.
Go ahead. You want to
Yeah,
start?
well, first, Kale right here. You can get in front of the camera, but Kale is our head of engineering at Teree Labs in Johannesburg, where the bulk of our engineering is getting done right now, although more and more we have open source contributors all over the world. But so Kale, Chirac. My name is Dan Teree. I've been in this great business we call ticketing since January 1999, probably before most of you guys graduated from high school. It's taken a lot out of me. But I got my start working with a little company called TicketWeb. Does anyone know TicketWeb? Okay, big in America and the UK. But TicketWeb's claim to fame was it was the first ticket in the world, first company in the world to sell an event ticket, as opposed to a travel ticket, and that was in December. Online, yes. Sorry.
Not ever.
I know exactly. Not ever.
Just
not
to
ever.
be clear.
It did not invent the paper ticket. But it was December 1996 in San Francisco at a music club called Bottom of the Hill. And I forget the show, but it was a local regional act. And yeah, that was the claim to fame. I wasn't the founder of that company, but I came on shortly, a couple years in after we got our first financing. Ran that business about a year and a half after I got there in May of 2000. We were sold to Ticketmaster. And then I ran that business, TicketWeb, for Ticketmaster for about 7 years. And then in 07 broke away, and then late 08, early 09 founded a company called Ticketfly. Does anyone, you guys familiar with Ticketfly at all? All right. So Ticketfly followed in the footsteps of Ticket. I'm not as famous as I thought I was. But Ticketfly followed in the footsteps of TicketWeb and really focused on middle market music clubs. All over the United States. So those clubs that were not part of the Live Nation, Ticketmaster world, and AEG world. So, and then in 2014, we sold that business to Pandora Media, a big streaming business out of the West Coast, for $450 million, which today I think still is the largest exit in the ticketing business. So obviously there's bigger companies like yours that are rising up. So and then I've known this guy Naveen for 10 years. So I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, my name is Naveen Jain, and I've been an entrepreneur for about 20 years. And my first company was in the music space. So I ran technology for primarily rock bands, bands like Linkin Park, Korn, Limp Bizkit, and there's got to be a Limp Bizkit fan somewhere. So I ran all their websites, their fan clubs, e-commerce operations, and ticketing. So the way we interacted with ticketing companies was we would essentially pull inventory off of primary to sell exclusively to their fan clubs. I also ran all technology for Bon Jovi for 3 world tours. So I still work with many of these artists today, and we still run e-commerce. That business still exists. We run e-commerce for brands like Beyonce, Fortnite, and many, many others. And then I built my second business in the logistics space. So I own a third-party logistics company in the US market primarily as well. And I'm also an angel investor in over 60 companies. And I've definitely been around the block in terms of building startups. So in terms of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, got involved about 4 years ago with a privacy-focused cryptocurrency project called Monero. Who here is familiar with Monero? Anybody? Okay. So Monero is a privacy-focused cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin, which I'm sure all of you guys know about, is pseudonymous. So it's not totally private. You can, if you have someone's address, you can see their balance. You can see sort of transaction history. So there's entire companies now, like there's a company called Chainalysis. Their entire job is essentially focused on analyzing people's transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain and other sort of public ledger blockchains. So the cool thing about Monero is that Monero is highly private. So it employs a variety of technologies, ring signatures, stealth addresses, what am I missing? Ring CT, confidential transactions. to essentially obfuscate transactions and hide the amount that you're sending, hide balances that you have. So the idea is that it's sort of like digital cash. Like if I hand you a dollar bill, no one really knows that I handed you the dollar bill. Monero is essentially, the idea behind Monero is that it's digital cash. So it uses pretty sophisticated cryptography to accomplish this goal. So that's how I got my start in the sort of blockchain space, was working on projects around the Monero project. In terms of Teree, which is our new startup, so the vision behind Teree is it's a digital asset protocol project. So it's a open source, public blockchain system that's focused on non-fungible tokens. So think of it as it's custom built for things like live event tickets, in-game items, loyalty points, digital collectibles, and other kinds of things that are sort of, they originate digitally. So things that are created digitally that can be issued on something like the Teree blockchain. And one of the first use cases that we're exploring for Teree is, of course, in the ticketing space. So we're actually building a brand new ticketing company in the US market called Big Neon. And the whole vision behind Big Neon is to say, hey, look, here is how tokenizing tickets can actually create a lot of value. So how can it actually create value? Well, it turns out that in the US and the EU market, one of the biggest problems is the fact that the original economic participants in the sale of a ticket, so the venue, the promoter, artist, or team, don't benefit when their tickets are resold. So one of the cool things about tokenized tickets is you can actually set rules around the tickets and trust the network to enforce those rules over time. So if you want to say, okay, every time the ticket changes hands, 20% of the revenue is split in this particular way, you can actually trust the network to help enforce those rules. You can implement time-based rules. So you could say, hey, 48 hours before doors open, we want to turn off secondary market transactions because we really want to drive everyone to buy from primary, because that's how we get more butts and seats, which is our goal. Everyone's goal is just get more people in the venue so they can buy more food and beverages, and there's more people in the audience, more merchandise. So a lot of really interesting things you can do. There's a whole slew of other things that you can do as well. So you can sell all kinds of other digital assets around tickets, right? So all kinds of digital collectibles, whether they're stickers or trading cards or other kinds of things that are digitally scarce. So there's concept of digital scarcity. So you could have a digital asset that is one of one. It's the only one in the world. And you can cryptographically prove that this is one of one, or one of five, or whatever it is. So that's actually a really interesting idea. So who here plays Fortnite? Well, Epic Games has work to do here.
That is I see that.
PUBG. Okay, fine. PUBG. Fine. Okay, cool. Yeah. So obviously, in a lot of these games, this concept of virtual goods, emotes, skins, these sorts of things are very popular. There's no reason, in our view, that you shouldn't be able to bring some of that type of business to the table along with tickets. Because if you think about someone who goes to see a movie, there's so much passion around movies and what's happening in the movie and the stories that are being told through the movies. Why not create other kinds of things beyond just the ticket that people can participate in? And then they can trade those things secondary market. If they're truly digitally scarce, they could be whole new markets created around those sorts of digital assets. Or things, take sports. Actually, just last week, Tom Brady is an American quarterback, plays for the New England Patriots, which is a football team in the U.S. market. A rookie football card was sold on the secondary market for over $300,000, right? And because it's rare. Or does anyone here play Magic the Gathering? Man, I'm losing today.
These are opportunities.
I'm not winning here at all. So Magic the Gathering is a really nerdy card game. It's really nerdy. But in the original version of the game, there was a card called the Black Lotus. The Black Lotus is a really unfair card. It's really like a cheat, basically. But it was very rare. They didn't print very many of these cards. So if you go on eBay, you can buy a Black Lotus card for hundreds of thousands of dollars if you want a mint condition Black Lotus card. So the idea is that, okay, these are examples of the physical sort of like version of something that's scarce. And if there's a market for those physical things, then those physical things can have tremendous value. It's no different than art or anything else. So why wouldn't digital things be treated in the same way? Well, we think in the future they will be. That's sort of the whole point, right? So, and one of the fascinating things about that card transaction is that Tom Brady didn't get paid, the NFL didn't get paid, so the card was resold for $300,000. Who got paid? The collector and the auction service. The only two parties that got paid. Oh, and PayPal, right? Whoever processed the transaction got paid. That's it. Imagine a world where we could set rules around that digital asset. We could say, hey, you know what? Doesn't matter. It could be 20 years in the future. This digital asset changed hands, and now that revenue was able to be shared. So we think the idea of a blockchain-based digital asset system is fundamentally unique. It's a revolutionary idea. And we're really excited about it. We think it has a real potential. And the goal is for it to be a global network, just like the Monero network is, or the Bitcoin network, or the Ethereum network, or these other networks. So it's usable anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter whether you're here in India, whether you're in the US market, wherever the heck you are. So at a very, very high level, that's what we're doing. From a technical standpoint, the system is being built almost entirely in Rust. Who here is familiar with Rust as a programming language? Okay, cool. So obviously it's thread safe, system level programming language, really cool, and super high performance. So that's sort of like the core sort of base layer technologies being developed primarily in Rust. But then obviously there's lots of tooling that we hope to create over time, bindings for other languages and those other sorts of things as well, because we don't expect everyone to get up and start developing stuff in Rust overnight. We think that's unrealistic. So we're happy to answer any questions you may have, but at a very high level, that's basically what we're doing. We're funded by venture capital firms in the US market. So firms like Redpoint, who was the first check into Netflix, Canaan Partners, Aspect Ventures, Blockchain Capital, and many others. Trinity Ventures. And our goal is to collaborate with world-class organizations like you guys and say, hey, is there a rationale? Is there a vision of the future here where using a blockchain system like what we're developing could create meaningful value for Book My Show and Book My Show's partners? That's really what we hope to explore with you guys over time.
When Naveen came to me about 1.5 years ago, again, I'd known him for 10 years. We've done business together. He explained, what blockchain could do. In America, resale is a bigger issue. It's a little more Wild West, and just huge leakage of economic value is like outside the realm of the people that work so hard to bring shows to market, that take the risk on the big bands for guarantees, or the sports team that pays all that money to players, but they're not benefiting from the resale of tickets directly. So I'm like, wow, not since tickets were first sold online, this is a big thing, because it really affects the amount of money clients can make in the context. But then all of this ability to independently verify that fans did something, that went to 3 shows, but they can do so without having to hit a central database. The asset, it's the bottle caps, it's the instead of physical playing cards, it's just a token on my mobile phone, and it's proof positive that I am a big fan of that sports team or of that artist, and you can do that without hitting any central server. So it's really proof that fans or consumers can carry around with them. They own it. You don't necessarily have to go back to some central authority. So
yes, we call that concept attestation. So the basic idea is that you have a tokenized ticket or tokenized digital asset really of any kind, and you can now you can validate without providing any PII to any third party. It's a permissionless system that you have that. So you would essentially provide your pub key and essentially a signed message, and then they can go validate that, on the blockchain that, okay, this is true. And then they can provide access. So it's sort of, imagine a ticket that can be used an infinite number of times, right? So right now the ticket is just useful once, to get access control. It's like for access control to get into a particular event. Imagine a ticket that can be used 1 million times. So one of the ideas one of the analogies we use, or examples we use, is imagine you're like a company like Disney, and you've put out all these Star Wars movies over time. If you could get someone who could actually prove that they've been to every single Star Wars movie on opening day, then maybe you'd want to do something special for them. Say, hey, we're creating Star Wars Land at Disneyland or Disney World. Why don't you come to opening day and we'll give you access? You still have to pay for it, but we'll treat you as the super fan that you are. Or maybe it's a brand sponsorship of some kind that wants to validate what you've seen or what you've done. Another example that we give is, with airlines. If you have status on an airline, a lot of airlines will status match. They'll give you similar status on their airline if you can prove that you have status on another airline. But the process today is broken. It's like, oh, you log into the website, you take a screenshot that shows you have status, you take a photo of your membership card, you email it to some nondescript email address, some human on the other end goes, oh, okay, yes, Mr. Jane, okay, yes, you're bronze. Okay, fine. You can now be bronze. We're going to give you a bronze medal. You're third place over here. And that's just so stupid, right? That's stupid. So,
I was at the Intix ticketing conference in Dallas a couple months ago, and we did a panel. I was on there with a couple secondary players. I was on there with the head of blockchain for Ticketmaster. They're making big investments in the space. And a question came up, like, well, we don't, I'm a ticketing company. There are all these ticketing executives in the room. And it's like, well, I don't want to give up control. Why would I want to give up control for ticketing? Everyone should just come to my website, my system, and buy tickets. And I gently kind of ask that person, I go, do you have all the marketing ideas to sell tickets? Do you have all the best ideas, all the ideas? And he kind of got him thinking like, so in a blockchain-enabled world, the issuer, a client, a sports team, or the ticketing company, a Book My Show, could program digital assets and put rules directly on the digital asset, and then let those tickets roam free in the world and let a number of new economic participants interact with those assets to sell them. Maybe it's packaging it up with travel. Maybe Naveen runs a cool little blog and he's all about jazz in Bombay, and he's just got a really cool following, but now he can interact with those assets and make a little money and move tickets. But again, so in a way you're freeing inventory, SKUs, tickets, digital assets to roam the world, and then let a number of new economic participants interact with those assets, but you still get paid. Book My Show gets paid. Your clients get paid. So I found that very freeing. It's like the best of all worlds, where like there's more freedom for new economic participants to interact, but the rules are sacrosanct as well. So that tension is really cool.
So final thing I'll say, and then we'd love to answer any questions we have, is blockchain technology is still very early, right? It's very early days. Lots of scalability challenges. Most of these systems don't really work in a real world context. Sort of like experimentation is really the best way I can explain it today. It's sort of science experiments. So one of the things we're really focused on is how do you build a system that actually, in this case, it's a public blockchain. It's not some private, version of it, permissioned sort of system, which is just basically a database. It's a public blockchain, similar, not too dissimilar to something like a Monero or a Bitcoin or other public blockchains. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about, what types of digital asset transactions really need core security from a base layer standpoint versus what can happen on a second layer. There's all kinds of really interesting technologies that we're exploring around this project. So we'd love to share some of those ideas and some of that thinking with you guys as well. So for example, from a base layer technology, we're planning on implementing something called Mimblewimble, which is sort of a really cool, newer concept around how to build a blockchain, right? And there's some privacy benefits to it, as well as some scalability benefits. And then we have a bunch of other really cool ideas that Kale is much better at speaking about than I am, that we'd love to share with you guys as well, that I think you guys will find really fascinating, because we think there is a way to build a public blockchain system that actually is scalable, sufficiently scalable enough for something as high demand as a high profile ticketing operation and many such operations all over the world and the other digital asset use cases concurrently. We actually think that there is a way to do that. We have a very sort of clear set of ideas around that we'd also love to explore with you guys. So any questions that we can answer for you?
Actually, why Rust?
What?
Why Rust?
Why Rust?
Yeah, because it's
Go ahead, Kale.
Sure. So, I mean, Rust is a very high performance language.
yes, but yeah, all the way down to data.
Yeah. So, I mean, most blockchains.
So the question was why Rust? Yeah.
Is the mic here? So what Rust's compiler prevents you from even writing code that has those kind of mistakes in it. So it's a fundamentally safer language to build this kind of technology in. It's a very modern language. It's got all the kind of features that modern engineers expect from a language, and it's got all the performance that C or C++ has. So it's kind of like the sweet spot for developing blockchain technology.
Just to be clear, the relationship between Teree and Big Neon, the kind of the master of the project is Teree. We're not focused on building a huge Big Neon in America, but it's really a showcase, a technical showcase for digital asset issuers on how this works. It's also, I call it our technical. I've never seen you repeat this analogy, but I call it our technical muse. We're serving. We had to get our first client, if you will, our first enterprise client is Big Neon. So that's helping our engineers build real things at scale, for real businesses. We've signed probably, $8 or $9 million worth of gross revenue already in the States. So it's our inspiration. We have to make it work end to end. And a lot of most blockchain projects, some really, really, really smart engineers, but they're kind of in a laboratory and they're like, it works. And it's kind of like the reaction of when I said, does anyone know ticket flying? No. It's not really doing anything real. So we're end-to-ending this and doing something very real. Because enterprises are inherently conservative. You're not going to choose some new technology that hasn't been proven. So we are the guinea pig. We are the monkey from outer space. We're setting this up. We're proving that it can come back, and we're just refining that process. So that's what I find really exciting. Because I'm a ticketing guy. It has to fucking work. On Friday night, when there's a huge line of people, it has to work. And so that's it's a dance between hardcore R&D and the real world.
So I actually have two questions. The first one being, how do you gauge the market for something like this? Because I think the closest to a third party, fourth party selling something which was originally something is a royalty-based system in television or movies, for that matter. So that is a established process of how it works. But how do you convert that into this business? And secondly, since you're looking at something which will probably give you benefits, say 10, 15, 20 years down the line, is when the whole system would be in place and anybody trading anything digitally would source back to the originating source and pay back. What is the revenue generating, or for that matter, performance depicting thing that you trace or you track or you look at for understanding that this is actually working? What is your success thing?
So, so secondary market globally for tickets is over $8 billion today. So most tickets are only resold once on a global basis because the average fee is something like 25% split between buyer and seller. So it doesn't make sense for tickets to be sold multiple times. However, if the original economic participants in the sale of the ticket, so the promoter and the team, the venue, whoever, the ticketing company, artist says, hey, you know what? We want a piece of that transaction now. And it's also, the tickets are issued on a permissionless system. So anyone can be the marketplace, right? Because no one goes to a StubHub or a Vivid Seats or a Viewgogo for discovery. No one does that. You basically Google, oh, I'm looking for Beyonce tickets in San Francisco. And then you'll see where they're available. That's how you discover. That's how you find the tickets you want to buy. So if anyone can essentially be a marketplace and there's these rules built into the ticket, then essentially the fees will drop, right? So you'll have a shift of value from the secondary market as it stands today back to the original economic participants. Now Beyonce gets paid and Live Nation gets paid and the venue owner gets paid, whoever, this whole food chain gets paid. And if they don't set their fees too high, then on the marketplace side, you'll have those fees drop just because there'll be more competition. There's more competition out there, right? So that's one thing that is nearer term. That's not a 10-year payoff. That's not a 15-year payoff. That's a 24-month payoff. And we're not live. The Teree blockchain is not live yet today. So we have to get that live first before any of this happens. Second thing is, one of the ideas that I was talking about earlier is this concept of other kinds of digital assets. So one of the ideas we shared with Ashish and Rick was in the US market, we have this challenge, or especially around music events, where the headliner is the one who really gets paid. The openers don't really get paid, right? So imagine a world where there's essentially like a tipping interface. So you can actually tip the openers, but instead of giving them tips like, oh, I'm just going to give you money, you do it through buying other kinds of digital assets. So maybe it's like stickers or other kinds of digital assets. Again, trading cards, skins, emotes, whatever you want to call them. These are all digital assets, essentially. Why not sell those as well along with the ticket? So the ticket, you don't have to just sell a ticket. You could sell 1,000 other things concurrent to that as well. And some of those things could be digitally scarce. Some of those things could be limited edition. There's only 5 of this one. There's 10 of this one. There's 15 of this one. And there can be a whole market around those things as well, depending on the brand and the band and how many fans they have and what's the size of the market, et cetera. So we think those kinds of ideas are near-term ideas. That's not a 10, 15, 20-year out thing. And I hear you on the royalty example or analogy. That's a good analogy. Totally. So we think actually also another fascinating idea is ticket stubs. The ticket stubs may have value long after the event. I have a friend who went to Prince's last concert in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, last concert Prince ever played. And he didn't play a huge venue. He played, it was like a 3,000 or 4,000 capacity room. It wasn't like a 20,000 capacity stadium. How many people knew that was Prince's last show? No one knew it was Prince's last show. The guy wasn't that old, right? What's the probability that it was his last show? So how many people kept those paper ticket stubs? Very few. Most people don't keep their paper ticket stubs. So maybe there's a couple hundred people. I don't know. What's the number of people that actually kept those ticket stubs? Now those ticket stubs arguably are valuable. They could be more valuable than the face value that they originally paid. So that's also not a 10 or 15-year out idea. I mean, look, my first band that I ever worked with was Linkin Park. Linkin Park's last concert that they played before Chester passed away was in Manchester in the UK. How many of those fans knew that was Linkin Park's last ever show that they would play with Chester? None of them knew. So we think there's a lot of different ideas here that will have a lot of value in our industry. And we don't think these ideas are 10 years out. We think these ideas are, a few years out before we can actually start to show real value creation around them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but now that you are already into it, what is the one thing that you trace as a success definition? Because this practicality of creating the value for that particular stuff will come out in say 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
Are you like waiting for 3 or 4
No.
years to come up, or
No.
do you have something that you're chasing today?
Yeah.
So I've now achieved this
Yes.
milestone A, milestone B.
So
what is it that you?
Great question.
So two ideas. The secondary market part, we think, is a near-term win. That's something we can do right away, especially in the U.S. market. May not have as much relevance here in India, but it has tremendous relevance U.S. and EU and other markets around the world. And the digital asset idea, this idea of selling other kinds of digital assets along with the tickets or along with in-game items, which are digital assets to begin with, that idea also is not far off. So that's something that we think there are artists, there are sports teams, there are other kinds of people today that would love to do that if they could. And if our system enables them to do that, they'll sign up.
So the additional revenue is something that
Yes.
Yeah, both.
coming in.
Yes.
It's the report that says, here's your primary revenue and here's your aftermarket, your resale revenue. And then this whole new revenue stream. We don't have all the answers. We have a lot of ideas, but it's really the gamification of blending with live entertainment and things like this. Like patterns that already are well trodden in gaming and other digitally consumptive recreational things. But it's two big new revenue streams. I mean, yes, we're going to cut out fraud. In America for some shows, fraud's real. Most of the time it isn't, but it really helps with that, of course.
What was your question?
How much infrastructure would you change on ground when you mentioned that you're building these products to scale? Venues usually shy away from deploying new infrastructure or any software, but how would you tackle it at a scale specifically? Because I can understand the main cities and the big concerts and festivals would deploy and experiment with this, but when you're talking about a couple of thousands of venues,
Sure.
how do you build the uniformity?
Yeah, so a lot of the software we're developing is open source. So the idea is that if we're able to show that something works at a base level, then other people can take that software, they can fork it, and they can start to use it on their own for their custom use case. Now, that doesn't change the fact that larger players can build highly proprietary things on top of the system, right? So it's not to say that a company like Book My Show that has divisions that do all the food and bev in the venue, divisions that do all the merchandising, divisions that are actually the producer of the event, the promoter of the event themselves. It's not to say that you can't build deeply proprietary components that no one else has. That fundamentally changes the business in a lot of ways. But there's base layer technology and sort of reference design implementations that are sort of simpler, that are open source. And so we think that over time, that's how this gets to scale in terms of lots of venues all over the world and lots of smaller ticketing organizations all over the world, because the engineering budgets aren't there. I mean, you guys have a world-class engineering team and you guys are at scale. Most ticketing companies don't have that around the world. So if we are building world-class technology, we're able to prove that it works because we've built our own ticketing company and we're able to show you the results. Here's the data. Here's how much additional money was made, then that's ultimately the best way for it to become a global success in many regions around the world. Does that answer your question?
Without going too deep, do you want to talk about how we get scalability at a very high level?
Sure. So in blockchain technology, when we say scale, it's normally asking how many transactions per second can the network handle. So if you think about Bitcoin, it can handle about 12 transactions per second, and then it's saturated. It can't deal with more than that, right? Compared with Visa, which can handle like 10,000 transactions per second at peak. I think on average it's 2,000 or 3,000 transactions per second. When you're talking about digital assets and then smart contracts, Um, the question becomes a bit more thorny. I don't know if anyone's played with Ethereum before or tried to use anything on the Ethereum network. That doesn't scale. Like anyone uses that for anything for any period of time, and the whole network just grinds to a halt. So as Dan said, like we're approaching this Atari a little bit differently, and we're trying to say, well, we're going to actually build a business that works, and it has to work. We don't want people standing in a line at a nightclub waiting to get in because the blockchain system takes 10 minutes to verify a transaction, right? So we're trying to build this from the beginning to handle all these use cases. So we're tackling this on several levels. Generally in blockchain, the more security you want and the more decentralization and safety, the slower it is. And that's why Bitcoin is super secure, because it takes 10 minutes to get into a block, and there's literally thousands of machines that are validating this transaction every time you do something on Bitcoin. So at our base layer, the Teree token is like the cryptocurrency part of it. That is the most secure layer, and that's the slowest layer of everything. And at its peak, that will handle about 20 transactions per second. That's not good enough for being able to do microtransactions. Like if we're playing some sort of in-game, if we're trying to track an in-game sword, and we want to track every time it gets a kill, and you get paid every time you kill an enemy, our base layer is not going to be able to handle that. So we're building a payments channel network, which acts as a much faster payments channel that rests on top of the base layer. In Bitcoin, the equivalent would be called the Lightning Network. It's a new technology. It's been out for a year, and it allows you to that allows you to do thousands of transactions per second on a one-to-one, a bi-party relationship. We're developing a multi-party payment channel to handle the Teree high-frequency transactions. So it's much faster, but there's a slight trade-off on security, but it's a very small trade-off, and everything can always fall back to the base layer. If anything ever goes wrong, you just drop back onto the slow and secure layer. Then we have a digital assets layer, which, and we're taking a very different approach to Ethereum. Now, the digital assets is kind of built on smart contract technology. And this is where the tickets live, and the in-game items, and the loyalty points, and all these things. And there's a lot more flexibility. So I don't see any reason why every single computer in the world needs to know when I buy an in-game item somewhere, or if I buy a ticket for a club in San Francisco, why does the blockchain server in Singapore need to know about that, right? So we're designing our digital assets network to be more localized. And you can run it, if you want control over your assets, you can run the servers and say, look, only our servers are allowed to process these digital assets. Or you can take a more free market approach and say, look, I don't want to invest in infrastructure. I'm just going to let the Teree network handle my digital assets for me. And I'm just going to say, I want to have a loyalty point system, and I'm just going to put it out there, and the network can handle it for me. On Teree, you can actually decide, you have the flexibility to decide, do you want control or freedom? And similarly, the data, do you want it to be open, or do you want it to be proprietary? And we'll design it in a way that you have complete control over how your digital assets get managed. So by splitting it up into those three layers, we believe we're kind of getting the best of all the worlds. You're getting both freedom and flexibility and control when you want to. So hopefully that answers the question.
What other questions?
So, first of all, thank you so much for the introduction. Really interesting. You mentioned that we can put rules to our transactions, right? And in terms of how many hands it can change and what time it can shut the secondary market. So with all these rules, and also you mentioned that we are not really a completely private, this is a public domain. So my first question is, are these rules visible to someone else? Can they see what rules have I set?
So,
the question was, will people be able to see the rules that are set on an asset?
Yeah, right, because it's not completely private.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and sort of leads on from my previous answer. It kind of depends what you want. The person issuing the assets can decide. Do you want it to be public or not? I think there's benefits to making it public in many cases. In other cases, you absolutely don't want people to know what the rules are. In those cases, you'll need to run the infrastructure that's managing those assets as well. But then the choice is yours, So I envisage most people would use the permissionless model and just make the rules available. What's also interesting though is that when we say the rules are public, it's like not all the information is public. The technology we'll be using, Mimblewimble, uses things called zero knowledge proofs. It's this kind of weird sort of maths that lets you prove things without giving any information away. And so we'll be leveraging a lot of that for the Teree network. Yeah, it's really up to you. At the end of the day, we want to make that flexibility available. So I think the bigger players, like Book My Show or Disney or whatever, would probably prefer to handle it themselves and have more control over what the public can see. But because it's the idea is that it's this kind of an open network for the world, I think most people will just use the publicly available templates for digital assets that are made available on the system.
Right. Second question would be, suppose we are looking at a loyalty program or how to gratify a user, and taking the example you gave of Prince's last concert. So we have more than doubled, almost tripled the number of events that we do in the past 4 years, and a lot of those events may not, like, so for example, that event, the Prince event has already happened and we had not plugged in this system. Or for example, a competitor did some other ticketing platform ticketed for that event. Can we still integrate past transactions and past events in going forward to gratify? How does that?
Well, I suppose, if you guys can issue any tokens you want, right? So the idea is that there's no limit to the tokens you can issue. So I suppose if you wanted to issue tokens for historical events, you certainly could. The question is will it be trusted, right? So if it's a third-party ticketing company that issued those tickets, and now Book My Show is issuing tokens related to that, what's the purpose of that? Will people really trust those to be truly digitally scarce, truly unique? But if it's used in sort of a loyalty context or used as sort of like a marketing context, you could absolutely do that, and it could be very successful, right? So if someone else was doing ticketing for this sports team, and then now Book My Show has the contract, and you say, hey, look, we have the database for all the people that bought tickets historically, and we're going to issue all of you guys a loyalty token, a special golden ticket. We're going to give you a golden ticket, and whoever has that golden ticket can get pre-sale access for the upcoming season. You could totally do that. There's no limit to what you can really tokenize. It's more a question of, is it really trusted? Is it going to be something that people are going to value as uniquely theirs? And they may not in that context, or they might, depending on how you put the spin on the ball. Does that make sense? Yeah.
First question, like you said, blockchain is quite new in the industry, right? It's quite a buzz. Did you wish to do something in blockchain and hence being neon, or you had a problem statement and you thought blockchain is solved?
Yeah. So the original place that we started was a lot of the blockchain systems that exist today are sort of a field of dreams approach. So it's a group of engineers who say, "Oh, we have a really cool idea. Let's go and build something cool, and then hope and pray that other people build something of value on top of it." Okay, that's the first challenge. Second challenge is that people are trying to build essentially God software, right? It's like, oh, Ethereum, you can build anything you want. It's the world's supercomputer, right? That is not rational for a lot of reasons. So most people who build software understand that having focus, having constraints actually is very valuable, because then you can actually build something that it's about trade-offs. Scalability, security, these are all different trade-offs that people can make when they're developing software. And then, look, we have a huge background, obviously, in ticketing ourselves, and we know that there are these real problems that we can solve. So we did start with that problem. We said, hey, look, let's start with problems that impact digital asset issuers. And by the way, a lot of the problems that companies related to ticketing or live events have, game publishers have similar problems, right? So there's these vast, rampant black markets that exist today around digital assets and games. So a lot of the game publishers have very similar problems as live event producers. So that's where the idea of it being a general purpose digital asset protocol came from. But you have to start somewhere. You have to start solving somebody's problem somewhere first. So that's why we're starting with ticketing. Even though the underlying system can be used to issue many, many kinds of digital assets, there's really very little constraint on that side of it. We are starting with one kind of digital asset initially, and that's tickets. Does that answer your question? So the best way to think about it is Teree is essentially a new economy. So there is a Teree token that is sort of useful throughout the system. So first and foremost, it's used to secure the network. So Teree is being architected as a merge mine sidechain with Monero. So Monero miners out there who are mining the Monero blockchain will essentially also get compensated in Teree tokens, which gives them incentive to really care about the underlying security of the Teree network. There's fees that are paid by digital asset issuers in Teree in order to issue digital assets on the network. There's fees paid for rule validation to the sort of rule validation network that also exists. So from our point of view, we really care about making Teree globally a successful blockchain system. So we benefit because there's some portion of the Teree token network or Teree token economy that's allocated to us. So that's ultimately how we benefit. But we're not interested in really taking revenue shares or royalties or traditional sort of economics, because we really want it to be a truly useful system out there in the world. So the actual fees that will be paid to the network are really de minimis. They're really small because it's more about scalability than it is about, let's take $1 every single time something happens. Does that make sense? Okay.
So how do you judge the market readiness in terms of consumer behavior? I mean, if you're talking about digital assets, etc., will there be certain consumer behavior characteristics you will look at before deciding whether this market is ready for this kind of technology?
Sure. So we would argue that the characteristics are already there. Epic Games made $3 billion net profit last year selling virtual goods in Fortnite, right? So things like emotes and skins and other kinds of things. Digital assets in the gaming industry is a $50 billion market worldwide. And people play video games all over the world, every single country, all over the world. So we would argue that the market is ready today. The market was ready last year or even the year before that. The problem is that the technology isn't ready and the technology wasn't ready. So now we're getting to a point where there are projects like the Teree project where we're able to cobble together the right types of technology to actually make a public blockchain really work in a real world set of use cases. And once the technology is there at that point, then you can start to have all these wonderful things come to be in terms of true digital scarcity around digital assets, true ownership around digital assets, attestations, all these other sort of capabilities that we've been talking about with you guys today.
I like that point to it. When you talk about gaming, it's traditional. It's been a long time since it's been digital and online, right? A lot of people were exposed to gaming only in the online world. So there is a certain digital adoption that is there for the gaming industry. But if you try and apply the same thing to say live entertainment or concert, etc., which has traditionally not been digital except for the ticket buying part, will that correlation still exist?
Again, I would argue yes, because what do people do during the concert? They sit there, and it's amazing to me. People spend money to buy tickets to go to shows, and they sit there on their phones like this. It's like people are socially awkward. They don't want to talk to people. They sit there on their phones. What are they doing? They're using social networks. They're doing whatever. They're watching content. So again, I would argue that look, the average person is spending north of 4 hours a day on their devices. Okay, it's an attention economy. So why the heck wouldn't they be doing that kind of stuff during the show? I mean, I agree with you that can they do that today? The answer is no, right? But does that mean that the market isn't ready for it? Again, we would strongly argue that it is ready for it based on all of the facts that I just shared and many more. Yeah.
One thing to note is that one thing we're not building on day one is a system where you have to use Teree to buy the ticket. You still use Visa, MasterCard, Amex, whatever. It's really the asset issuer, let's say Igneon or Book My Show, would be paying the network to do what the network does to manage, issue, and validate those assets. So it's more of an enterprise level use of the token. Down the road, for sure, we expect, consumers to interact with Teree and buy virtual goods. But on day one, it's really at the enterprise level. Those are the folks that are using Teree to run the network.
So, like blockchain, Rust is also relatively new. It's just picked up 4 or 5 years back, if I'm not wrong. Was it a calculated step to use both new technologies? And what kind of challenges you face while implementing this?
So if I understand the question, you're asking, was it a choice to use 2 new technologies, in that Rust and blockchain?
Blockchain and like with Rust as well. Were there any challenges that you faced because it's relatively new?
Yeah, Rust is new. I think it's only 3 years old, and what that means is that it doesn't quite have the infrastructure like the third-party set of libraries that something like Java has, right, or Node.js. However, it's growing really fast, and the blockchain community is adopting Rust very quickly, which means that the tools and libraries that we need,
Contributors are more productive.
yeah, so cryptography libraries, peer-to-peer messaging systems, and all these kind of things, that the building blocks that we're building the technology out of are rapidly coming into Rust. And because Rust is such a fantastic language for building very robust systems, as I said before, the compiler just doesn't let you do stupid things that C++ does. C++ gives you a gun and says, go ahead and shoot yourself in the foot. And all the rope you want to hang yourself. Whereas Rust says, no, we're going to take and put those away, and we're going to make sure that the safety catches on. But what's beautiful is that the code is super fast at the end of the day. So that just makes it the right choice for this kind of thing.
I mean, just to put some real world numbers on it, the team in Johannesburg basically all learned Rust for the first time and built version 1 of Big Neon that's selling tickets as of January in about 6 or 7 months.
Yeah.
Real-world problems when you took your code to production, and were there any stability problems that you faced for the first time?
Surprisingly little. So I could, before I went to Teree, I worked at Coinbase, and GBAX is the cryptocurrency exchange of Coinbase, and the API there was built in Node.js, and that those machines could handle. I mean, we were doing about 250,000 requests per minute over about 100 instances, 100 APIs. So I think it comes out to like each machine, each node instance could run. I think it could handle about 40,000 requests per minute. Our Rust APIs don't even break a sweat. It is just so fast, and so like and because the compiler doesn't let you. There's no such thing as a memory you can let in Rust. The compiler just doesn't let you do it. So it takes you forever to write your code because it just doesn't compile. But once it compiles, it just works. That's one of the beautiful things that I've discovered with Rust, is that it's you can hate it while you're still learning it and fighting with the compiler. But once you get past that, it's just life's good. Yeah. There are some problems. There will be bugs, obviously, but it's not the typical resource bugs that you get in other languages. You don't get out-of-memory errors, or because you let down your pointers. I'm sorry about that. this doesn't make sense, but a common problem with other languages is that you just like sloppy memory management, and your memory requirement just grows and grows and grows until a whole machine crashes. That just doesn't happen.
So, I have one question. So I have actually problem digesting, considering your ticket as a digital asset. Because when you talk about ticket, right, so ticket has a lifetime. Let's say when you talk about a Ethereum or a Bitcoin, it's there until, there's no lifetime of that coin. You can just keep passing on and on and on and on. When you say a ticket as a digital asset, it's only valuable until the time of the event. Right, and the use case that I can see with blockchain is only the reselling part. Like what, like why would you choose blockchain for like ticketing? Like what is the, how did you come up that blockchain would be a good fit for this kind of use case because it has a lifetime?
So again, yeah, we agree that generally speaking, tickets are temporal in nature. So I mean that's true. But again, we would agree that we would argue that there are many circumstances where those tickets can be useful well after the event. So again, examples that I gave, it's like, okay, if you went and you saw 5 movies at this particular theater, and the movie theater operator wants to reward people that have seen 5 movies at the theater, or 5 movies period, now you can use those tickets again. Those tickets are now useful again. Sure.
Any day go and do some data, let's identify this guy's doing first shows and then give him something else.
Yes.
Right? So how does this help?
Yeah, so sure, but then someone needs to integrate with you to do that, right? So the idea with the Teree blockchain is permissionless. So anybody can do that kind of thing now. So anybody can, if you own the ticket, if you own the digital asset, you can essentially validate that for anybody who chooses to accept that sort of ticket. So one of the biggest problems is when you think about enterprise sales, you think about integration between companies. It's very slow. So the average time it takes to do any kind of enterprise deal is many, many months. And then their engineers get involved, the lawyers. Oh, my favorite is the lawyers, right? Just get the lawyers involved, right? And there are 2 types of lawyers. There's like deal makers and there's deal killers, right? There are 2 types of lawyers. So that's a waste of time. That's a giant waste of time. If you had an ecosystem where all these digital assets are out there, people actually possess them, they own them, and now there's this network that anybody can choose to interoperate with however they choose based on the rules associated with the digital asset. So again, it's incumbent on the original digital asset issuer to set rules around it because they may not want certain things to happen, and that's fine. That is tremendously valuable because you eliminate all of this friction. All this friction that exists from doing traditional deals. And then you can say, well, Naveen, we can expose an API. We can expose an API that allows anybody to do whatever we want. Well, look at what happens with companies like Facebook. Facebook says, oh, here's APIs. You can do whatever you want. I built a company that was one of the first companies funded by Facebook Fund. So I actually got a call myself from Sean Parker. He said, Naveen, here's $100,000 to build your Facebook game. And so, my growth mechanic was incentivized invites. So basically, I would say, hey, you want to play the game, you want some free currency in my game, spam all your friends. Spam them unlimited, as many times as you want, because Facebook allowed us to do that. And then what happened over time? Facebook started to clamp down. They start to change the APIs. They start to change the system because it's all about what Facebook wants. It eliminates trust. Similarly, Ticketmaster used to have a system where they paid affiliate fees. So I remember we used to set up there was a scheme that we set up where we would set up separate companies to register with the Ticketmaster affiliate program because they couldn't know it was me, right? And then we put our affiliate links on all the artist websites, and we would make tons of money on the side from the affiliate programs. But then, of course, Ticketmaster starts to change the rules of the program and change the APIs and limit until they're useless. Ticketmaster's APIs today are completely worthless. Facebook's APIs are not entirely worthless. They're useful for things like login and other things, but they're not as useful as they were before. It's become a giant toll taker. So, and then there's no trust in the system. So we think that creating this sort of a system where there's more trust in the underlying system, because the underlying system doesn't have a motive, right? The underlying system is not about economic capture or user capture. And as a result of that, now it creates a more level playing field for people to play together, and there's actual value creation across the board for all parties. So that's why we think that blockchain technology is actually so powerful for the ticketing industry.
In summary, this is more about taking this and creating a marketplace out of it where you can integrate with other guys and give them a little play.
It lowers the bar of innovation, right? So you don't have to go through the lawyers because everything's going to get killed. If you can't, there's a fixed cost to doing deals on a centralized basis, but on a decentralized basis, the bar is much lower. So wisdom of crowds, you can get a lot more experimentation going on how to sell things.
Okay.
Do you need regulation snags in places? Because like in India, digital cryptocurrency, the exchange and stuff is not completely legalized yet. So not that you're here yet, but do you face such regulation snags elsewhere?
So absolutely, and this is a regulatory gray area. That's the reality of the scenario. But we think that as we go out there and articulate where there's value, and look, some of the rules that can be created around tickets can be government-oriented rules, things like taxation or geographic restriction or identity. Obviously in India we have this giant identity database, which everyone loves. So I would argue that as long as governments and regulators see value, then there will be less interest in constricting the use of the technology. And it's incumbent on groups like us and partnerships that we form and with others to make sure we articulate that to regulators around the world.
Do you have any snags with other country or companies?
No, I mean, look, we do a lot of our work in the U.S. Obviously,
it's pretty open, and they do. I mean, Congress is understandably better at understanding, say, if you come up to them with the technology, somebody would be there to make them understand what that would eventually do to the market. But for a government like the one in Saudi Arabia, which works in a completely different format, and a democracy like ours, or a military-based one that is
sure.
The next one, I mean, you will hit a lot of people who will want to say no only because they have the authority to say no.
Sure.
Yet you would want to sort of
Sure.
move past that. So
Sure.
have you hit something like this yet? Or
we haven't yet, but again, what I'll say is that if the government is going to make more money or is going to be able to enforce other policies that they care about, then there may be more openness than there is today. Like today, we agree. There are definitely many geographies around the world where this sort of thing is just either illegal or it's too risky for someone to pursue it. But let's take India for example. If we think that if you go to the government and you say, hey, look, here is opportunity. Here's how you can actually have real clarity around tax collection. Here's how you can have real clarity around identity-related matters. Here's other sorts of things that you really care about, security-related matters, whatever. Then maybe there's openness. We could be wrong. I mean, we're not saying we have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. But we think that we haven't hit a snag yet. And the folks that we've been working with in the US market, the European market, Canadian market, other markets, at least so far have appeared to be open. They've not said no.
But to be clear, we've run our project very down the middle of the fairway, very conservatively. Like, we didn't run it the way people were running it 3 years ago, doing an ICO and taking money from every time.
That was last year then.
In crypto world, that was a long time ago.
Yes.
But we're very conservative players. Yeah. We have excellent counsel. We've done things in almost like a paranoid way about staying down the middle of the fairway. We're not outlaws here. But other projects have been run very differently. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Any other questions?
In terms of security, blockchain is pretty much exposed. What have you done specifically for security?
So the question was, what have we done specifically related to security? Because blockchains are experimental technology.
I'd say the math. It's based on maths, the security, which is the assumptions around security and the mathematics are like proven mathematically. So if you trust the maths, you can trust the security. And it's possible to break the security of, for example, Bitcoin but you need more computing power. You need all the world's computing power to run for billions of years using current technology. In future, that might change. Like quantum computing, 50 years time, maybe quantum computing breaks Bitcoin security. But if it does that, it actually breaks everything on the planet. All your banking, like secure web surfing, everything breaks. So we have bigger problems than just cryptocurrency being broken if you break the security around cryptocurrency.
But let's think Bitcoin itself. There are technologies which have been broken by hackers.
So the technology around Bitcoin has never been broken. What has happened is that exchanges and people that have been holding private keys on behalf of people. So in Bitcoin, when you own Bitcoin, you own a private key, you own a number, and that represents the Bitcoin. That represents the digital asset. If you lose that thing, you lose the Bitcoin. Now, the idea in cryptocurrency is that you take ownership of the private keys, but exchanges often run where it's custodial. So you trust the exchange to keep your money for you. Those guys can get hacked and the keys can be stolen, but nothing is broken on the cryptocurrency there. Not 1 cent has ever been lost on Bitcoin because of the broken security. Every single story you read about people using Bitcoin is because they've been careless. The systems have been hacked and they've had their stuff stolen from them. In the same way as like if someone breaks into your house and steals the gold out of your safe. You haven't broken the gold monetary system. You've just had a lapse in security in your house. So it's a different one. The security issue is on a different layer, but the mathematics securing Bitcoin and any of the cryptocurrencies that we're developing it's been running for 10 years and it's been 100% hack-proof. Every single situation that's been stolen, every single Bitcoin that's been stolen is as a result of it's been like pickpocket. Yeah, it's the system itself has never broken.
Yeah. So we're not rolling our own cryptography here, right? So we're using established cryptography that is being used in many other contexts, many other use cases around the world. So that's really important, not to reinvent the wheel when it comes to cryptography. That's how you create really insecure things, generally.
One notion I wanted to get out was not only is Teree, of course, an open source project, but our ticketing software is also open source. Now that doesn't mean that a company can't create their secret sauce, as Naveen said earlier, on top of that. But we think that to help gain adoption for the Teree network, we want to help asset issuers. And one group of asset issuers that we really, really know well are ticketing companies and the needs of their clients. So one notion that we're discussing here is the possibility of collaborating together on this new open source project around ticketing. So that's pretty darn exciting. There's so many companies reinventing the wheels, seed pickers, holds, all that stuff. It's not really secret sauce, it's blocking and tackling. And wouldn't it be cool if, you could gain free access to a lot of stuff that's already been done, and then you can build your secret sauce on top of that. So that's kind of the notion of what we're doing on the called Big now, but it's going to be called like OpenTix. That I welcome any names of the open source project, for the ticketing applications. So.
Any other questions you guys have for us at this juncture? I'm sure we'll meet again.
In a online in one of our.
No, we'll come back if they have us. Yeah. We'll come back. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for having us. Really, really appreciate it.
A great honor.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Sure. So if you can have the breakout in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So once a part of the breakout can stay here. And we start by 11:50.
Okay.
So we can connect with the Bangalore team on VC.
Sure.
And we'll have a little tech product and certain on teams.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, great questions. Great questions.
I wish our team asked that many questions.
I know.
As we're in our all hands.
Just what extent, but want to connect your laptop or something?
I'm not sure if we're gonna do
Because
that.
saying we want to show certain things.
Let me ask Dan. I'll ask him. Oh no, it was great. I mean, what do you think? Was it useful?
It was